This is the American Law Journal.
Pornographic emails, criminal charges, forced retirements, and dismissals from the bench. And this is just the tip of the iceberg for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court scandal. Good evening, I'm Christopher Naughton. Welcome to ALJ. What now for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and other high courts that may be losing their way? Gina Passarella with the Legal Intelligencer reports.
Pennsylvania Supreme Court judge at the center of an alleged porn email scandal at the Attorney General's office has been relieved of judicial and administrative duties on an interim basis.
This matter with Justice McCaffrey is unprecedented.
You have animosity, you have judges, justices being indicted and convicted, you have another justice basically being forced out.
Name calling amongst the justices, sociopath and egomaniac, liar.
They shouldn't be sending pornographic emails to each other, but it's actually even worse.
And it's really kind of a mess.
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court is no stranger to controversy.
You go back to the early 90s and there's a fractured court with Justice Rolf Larson, who was eventually impeached and removed from the court. And there was a lot of tension and animosity among the justices.
But it would be hard to top the events of the last 2 years.
Scandal rocking the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court tonight. Justice Joan Ori Melvin is now speaking out after being charged with corruption.
She used her staff in campaigning, and she shouldn't have done it. She was charged and convicted and made to apologize to the other judges in Pennsylvania and even send pictures to them with her in handcuffs.
Little did the court realize that its real trouble was just starting.
And I will not resign.
Chief Justice Ron Castile, a Republican, and former Eagles vet stadium judge Justice Seamus McCaffrey, a Democrat, were at each other's throats almost from the start. But last month, everything changed rapidly. And as bad as it was, it got worse. Castile disclosed that McCaffrey sent over 200 sexually explicit emails to the state attorney general's office. McCaffrey apologized, sort of.
I think the momentum built when Justice McCaffrey issued his apology, which a lot in the legal community viewed as a non-apology. And when he basically spent about 2/3 of his message ripping into Castile and calling him a liar.
That, and the next day when fellow Justice Michael Aiken claimed that McCaffrey essentially extorted him, saying he would reveal to the press that Aiken had received or sent out pornographic emails to the AG's office too. Unless, of course, Aiken got Castile to back down. Aiken went public with McCaffrey's alleged threats.
I think that was the tipping point. The minute Aiken's letter went out, I think a lot of people thought, this is done. Within a few days, that happened on a Friday, that letter became public. By Monday, he was suspended. By the following Monday, he had resigned. So it was never just about porn.
And that's really been the tip of the iceberg. I mean, in the last 10 years, there have been other real big problems, like the Luzerne Kids for Cash crisis, almost the entire bench of the Philadelphia traffic court being indicted. I mean, when is enough enough?
What got lost in the glare of the salacious headlines was the fact that members of the state Supreme Court may have committed a serious breach of judicial ethics by communicating directly to prosecutors without defense attorneys knowing what was going on.
Porn, sure, that's bad, but it's actually even worse if they're discussing cases outside the judicial process.
Other state Supreme Courts have faced similar problems. They might want to take a cue from the nation's highest court.
An interesting difference, I think, between the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court is that on the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices will say nasty things about each other's opinions, and in a way that if you're a clerk, say, working at the court, you might take personally and feel offended by. And I did when I was working there. I felt quite hurt and angered by some of the things that some justices said about opinions that I was working on with my justice. But actually, the justices all get along pretty well.
Which is what Pennsylvania is praying for next year.
I think the justices who are there now, I think they sense the problem. I think they're not happy with it. I think there's this almost sense of maybe shame and resolve.
The scandal provides the state with another watershed moment. Is it ready to say yes to a system that it has said no to countless times in the past?
When you elect judges, I mean, that is a strictly partisan political process.
I generally think that appointing judges is better than electing them. We've proven pretty unable to separate money from politics and from campaigns.
It's a flawed system. Problem is I don't think there's any political will whatsoever to change that system at all.
And I think that this scandal should prompt a constitutional convention to have appointed judges, which will reduce the political problems in Pennsylvania where judges need to spend money and secure contributions from lawyers to get elected to their office. It should be ended.
There's no doubt the Pennsylvania courts have been in turmoil, and as we've heard, this is far from the first time that's happened. In order for the public's faith in the integrity of the system to be restored, there's still a lot of work to be done. But that may come down to whether there's both the political and the judicial willpower. For the American Law Journal, I'm Gina Passarella.
In a state notorious for trouble with its judges, this has got to really be the low point for the Pennsylvania judiciary, what it's gone through in these last 6 to 12 months.
I heard somebody call it a laughing stock of the entire country, and that's not really a list you want to be on the bottom of. People just don't expect to hear their justices talking about porn or calling each other sociopaths and all of the infighting and the personal animus. It's just, I think, taken a lot of people back, even people who've watched the court for 20 years and seen previous scandals.
And Howard, you're an appellate lawyer, so that, I mean, you were hired quite often to stand in front of appellate law judges. And let's face it, not that a court of common pleas judge is anything to sneeze at, but when you're standing in front of a bank of justices, there's a different electricity in the air. There's a different pedigree when you're standing in front of an appellate court. So when something like this goes sour, isn't the tragedy doubled or trebled?
I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, the most recent events come close on the heels of the removal of Justice Ori Melvin on a criminal conviction for campaign violations.
Let me bring in Garrett Epps right now. He is a contributing writer with The Atlantic and the American Prospect, a professor of law at University of Baltimore. His new book is American Justice 2014, 9 Clashing Visions on the Supreme Court. Before we maybe go a little bit more broadly in the conversation, Professor Epps, have you been watching what's been going on with Pennsylvania, either with glee or disdain?
Well, I would say neither. I think that there's a great deal of compassion that I feel because these situations on state Supreme Courts occur, not seldom. I don't think Pennsylvania is particularly distinctive. We had a similar situation not just a few years ago on the Wisconsin Supreme Court where one justice said that another had come into her office and grabbed her around the neck and tried to strangle her. So in Oregon, where I lived for many years, we had a justice who had to resign because he was accused of trying to force sexual attention on members of the court staff.
Long before some of these lurid, pornographic emails went to the AG's office, state AG office, it seemed like there was bad blood almost from the get-go. And what was curious about it wasn't as if they were having these arguments in the halls of the Supreme Court and somebody overheard them yelling loudly to one another. They seemed to go through third parties. You often heard it through commentators or through the media, through the newspapers. Wasn't that in some ways unprecedented?
I think so, and maybe that is a feature of our new plugged-in society.
The nation is divided. Its legal system is also divided no less than any other part. And I think in some ways, and maybe this is just a fantasy notion, that we expect our justices to be above the political fray, or at least to appear to be above the political fray.
Well, it was considered obligatory to try to pretend that you're above politics, but of course, nobody gets on the Supreme Court who isn't politically pretty savvy. A federal judge is defined as a lawyer who knew a senator.
It undermines the legitimacy of the court, don't you think?
Well, I sometimes wish the justices would just give us a little bit of a vacation from their views on everything and settle down and do their jobs. The justices are supposed to be allowed to speak freely, basically for educational purposes. You can discuss cases, you can talk about points of law. If you're doing it, to educate young lawyers or in an educational situation and so forth. Attending any kind of event where funds are being raised, I think really is something that they should not do. Now, bear in mind, the Supreme Court has basically got a system where none of the rules apply to them. So they can do whatever they want, and Justice Alito can appear at a fundraiser for the American Spectator, or Justices Thomas and Scalia can go to events hosted by the Koch brothers, and there's nothing that can be done about it. But I think It is what my grandmother would have called tacky.